Hello and welcome to our special program on the launch of China's latest lunar mission, Chang'e 6. I'm Wang Mengmang in Beijing. The Long March 5 Y8 carrier rocket that will carry the probe is preparing for liftoff. It's now standing by at the Wenchang spacecraft launch site in the southern Chinese province of Hainan, and the Chang'e 6 probe will collect the first ever samples from the far side of the moon. It will also carry scientific equipment from France, Italy, the European Space Agency, and Pakistan. Here in the studio with me, I'm joined by Professor Yang Yuguang. He is the vice chair of the Space Transportation Committee at the International Astronautical Federation. Always great to have you with us on our program, Professor. Well, the Chang'e series of lunar probes take their name from a Chinese legendary goddess who flew from Earth to the moon. Let's now take a look at some of the milestones in China's lunar program.
The lunar program began 20 years ago. Since then, China has carried out missions orbiting the moon, landing and returning samples to Earth. In 2007, the Chang'e 1 entered the moon's orbit, making China the 5th country to do so. In 2010, the Chang'e 2 also orbited the moon. Images it sent back allowed scientists to pick moon landing sites for its successor. It then travelled several hundred million kilometres from Earth, further than any Chinese spacecraft had gone before. 3 years later, the Chang'e 3 lander and rover achieved the first controlled soft landing since the Soviet Union's success in 1976. In 2018, the Chang'e 4 became the first spacecraft to land on the far side of the moon. In 2020, Chang'e 5 brought back 1.7 kilograms of lunar rock and soil. It was the first time in 4 decades that material from the near side of the moon had been brought to Earth. Now, Chang'e 6 will attempt to bring material from the southern hemisphere of the moon's far side. This side always faces away from Earth, making it difficult for a craft to land or take off without a relay communications satellite. If the mission is successful, it will provide a new look into the early evolution of the moon and the inner solar system.
Well, for the latest from the launch pad, let me bring in our reporter Sun Ye. She's been following the development there very closely, and she's live for us from Wenchang. Well, Sun Ye, good to see you. Of course, excitement is building up prior to the big moment of the launch. Bring us the latest, please. What are you hearing right now?
Hey there, Mama. Yes, we are 3.5 kilometers away from the launch site. And of course, that's China's most powerful and fastest rocket, the Long March 5 rocket. But whenever this rocket comes out, everyone will have their eyes turned into one direction and looking at it. But of course, today is an even more special occasion. Chang'e 6 is starting an epic journey to the moon. It's the Chang'e 6 mission will be sample retrieving from the far side of the moon. No one has accomplished that before, and actually going to the far side of the moon is groundbreaking and hard enough. Only the Chang'e 4 mission in 2019 has safely landed on the far side of the moon, and you can imagine when it comes to sample collecting and returning from the far side of the moon, it's going to be so much more complicated. And experts here have been telling us over the past week that this is a mission that they are like treading on thin ice and no mistakes is allowed. And of course, we're looking at the Long March 5 rocket. This rocket has a successful track record. It had sent China's most complicated, most expensive, and obviously heaviest spacecraft to space. And it is ready, as professionals here have been telling us. They are well prepped for the mission. But the launch is only the first step to over 50 days of many actions. And there are some serious hoops that this mission has to jump for it to accomplish. Now, after launch, the probe has to experience a rush to the moon process. It also has to pull the brake exactly when it needed to. And you can imagine the landing on the far side of the moon is complicated. And the sample collecting, which involves both drilling and collecting sample from the moon surface, these carry their own risks. And the probe's 4 components would be separating and getting together multiple times. So there's a lot of steps, and every one of the steps has to be correctly done and in a timely manner, and done in on a deadline for the mission to be successful. So we imagine over the next over 50 days, there's going to be a lot of moments that we're going to have our hearts in our throats. But of course, it's also those moments that make this mission so much more rewarding, and everyone is anticipating that. Just now we talked to a Pakistani scientist. Now, the scientists, they've unanimously told us that the Chang'e 6 mission is a golden opportunity for science research, and that Pakistani scientists said in Pakistan, everyone is also watching the live streaming for the Chang'e 6 mission. And then we also just talked to a French scientist, and he said not only, the community has been waiting not only for the samples coming from the far side of the moon, which is something they've never had and have been anticipating for decades. But again, this mission could help solve some of the biggest questions, or lead us to the answers to the biggest questions we have about the moon, about ourselves, including can we live on the moon and can we use the resource there. So obviously Chang'e 6 mission is huge, it's epic, and we are going to have our eyes chained on it every step of the way. Mama.
Yeah, indeed. This will be a technically challenging mission and an epic journey, as you mentioned. Also, international payload is one highlight of the Chang'e 6 mission. You mentioned scientists from Pakistan and France, and also from other countries are also watching closely as we wait for the moment of blastoff. Thank you so much, Sun-Ye, for bringing us that from Wenchang. Now, to coordinate the launch of Long March 5 rocket, part of the Chang'e 6 lunar mission, is not an easy task. CGTN's Wu Lei talks to Liao Guorui, the launch commander of the Long March 5 rocket, and brings us more on the preparations and challenges for this mission.
You have participated in over 40 space launches over the past few years, but this is your first time as a launch commander for the lunar exploration programs. How do you feel about this mission, and how does it compare to the previous ones you've been involved in?
The launch commander is the principal coordinator at the launch site, who plays the role of connecting the commanding center and the subsystems, communicating all the decisions and procedures. I need to coordinate over 20 subsystems during the launch process. Chang'e 6 is a part of China's lunar exploration project, and I'm very excited and honored to be part of the program. I have done some key analysis and been very familiar with the launch of the Long March 5 rocket.
What are some of the major challenges that you have encountered so far during this mission?
One of the challenges is that this time the Long March 5 rocket had multi-trajectories in a narrow launch window, which meant our entire team had to make plans for different rocket trajectories during the launch. We had to determine which trajectory to be used to carry out the flight mission only 25 seconds before ignition. Time is very limited, so we had to do a lot of planning and preparation for this.
The Chang'e 6 mission is the first attempt to collect samples from the far side of the moon. What do you expect to be found?
We haven't got any sample from the far side of the moon before. This is humans' first attempt to do so. I'm really excited. Human beings still have very limited knowledge of the entire universe, and we hope that through the efforts of generations after generations, we will continue to expand our understanding of unknown space.
All right, now let's hear some more analysis from my guest here in the studio, Professor Yang Yuguang from the Space Transportation Committee at the IAF. Well, Professor Yang, you've accompanied us on many occasions in China's space program. Every time you're here witnessing some great moments and sharing with us your thoughts, your expertise on the importance and the significance of the launch mission. And as mentioned by Sun Ye, the Chang'e 6 will be operating for 53 days, and the mission involves 11 phases, and every step of the way is important, is pivotal for the success of the mission. Tell us what are your expectations for this mission, and which part will be the most important or difficult?
Well, as you mentioned, I always be witness of the important moment for China's space activities, and I always recognize it is my honor to introduce our space missions to the whole world. And also, I recognize it as my duty as a technician from the China space field to have this responsibility to tell the public how important it is, how necessary it is of our space missions. As you mentioned, that's the several years before in 2020 we conducted the Chang'e 5 mission. Just until now, before this Long March 6 mission, the Chang'e 5 mission is the most complicated mission in China aerospace because it has so many steps. So that at that moment, the Chang'e 6 probe is the backup of Chang'e 5, which means if anything wrong, any problem may happen to the Chang'e 5 mission. So after we have found what is wrong and we got improvement, we can, in a short period, we can launch the Long March 6 and conduct the sample return from near side of the moon. Yeah. But you know that the Chang'e 5 is a perfect mission and a complete success. So after that, the role of Chang'e 6 changed this time. So as Sun Ye mentioned, we will get samples from far side of the moon. Just 4 hours before, in Global Watch, I have already talked with your colleague Song Ning that we both have challenges and opportunities. So for the challenges, that for the Chang'e 5 mission is already the most complex mission we conducted before. But this time, although the Chang'e 6, from the view of hardware, it's quite similar to the Chang'e 5, all composed of 4 spacecraft. From the bottom to up is the orbiter, the returner, the lander, and the ascender. So 4 spacecraft. But it is more complex than the Chang'e 5 mission. That you asked which is the most dangerous or risky part. From my view of a technician, the most important or the most risky part will be the lunar orbit rendezvous, which means that the 2 spacecraft rendezvous and dock together in the circumlunar orbit. So that
extreme high velocity,
extremely important, extremely risky, and so high requirement. That many people doubt about whether the Apollo program is true or not. One thing is that that in 1960 or 1960s, it's almost
about half a century
unbelievable
ago
that the human being can conduct a docking in the 6th lunar orbit. That on the lower orbit, we already have many special coverage on the docking of Shenzhou and the Tiangong space station. That's already very difficult. But that docking and rendezvous on the lunar orbit more than 380,000 kilometers from the Earth, that's more difficult. And that's because we don't have much support for the, especially navigation, which means that the determination of the position and the velocity of the spacecraft. So the measure of the velocity and the position will be the first step for us to get the right operation. Now you already seen the launch pad and also our Long March 5B launch vehicle. So also, as you mentioned, the launch will be the first step. But this is only the first step. So we have more than more critical steps during the whole process, and each one is critical for us. Wow. And if anything wrong happens to one certain step, we cannot do the others later. So this is why it is so challenging.
Now, as we're watching live feed from the launch pad in Wenchang, we could see this big rocket, the Long March 5 carrier rocket. That's China's strongest carrier rocket.
And the most powerful one.
That's right. And it's sitting there quietly at the launch pad. But then it's going to start this epic journey lasting for about 53 days. Let's talk about the rocket itself. It has a successful track record, as Sun Ye just mentioned, launching not only the Chang'e missions, but also the Wentian module, the Tianwen module, the Mars probe, as well as the core module of China's space station, the Tianhe. Are you optimistic about the launch mission this time?
Well, you know that the Long March 5 already, actually speaking, is a rocket family. It has two members now, the Long March 5 and Long March 5B. What you mentioned, the one launched the Wentian, Mengtian, and the Tianhe 1 core module is called Long March 5B, which is what we call a 1.5 stage rocket. So it only have one stage in its core and 4 boosters. So it is used to launch the very heavy and very huge payload to the low Earth orbit, several hundred kilometers high. But another member is called Long March 5. So it is this one. It's a 2.5 stage rocket. So in the core, it has 2 stages and also with 4 side boosters. So this rocket, not same as its derivative, is to launch the very high altitude payload to the outer space. So the major task will be, as you mentioned, the 2 lunar sample return missions, Chang'e 5, Chang'e 6, and also our first Mars missions, the Tianwen 1. And also the other missions are conducted to send the payload to the geosynchronous orbit, actually speaking, geosynchronous transfer orbit, to send payloads to the geostationary orbit with altitude more than 360,000 kilometers high. So this rocket, because you know that it has additional stage comparing with its family member, so it has the ability to launch a payload to a very high altitude. So that is the reason why we use this rocket. Actually speaking, the capability of the Long March 5 is 14 times to the GTO, or the geosynchronous transfer orbit. And for launching a payload to the translunar orbit, the capability is more than 8 times. You can see how powerful it is. So for the China Aerospace, because you know that the Chang'e sample return mission, the probe is so big, more than 8 tons. So we don't have other choice. We can only use a Long March 5 rocket to launch this so heavy 8-ton level probe to the moon.
And the probe will be bringing back 2 kilograms of samples. That's a little bit more than what Chang'e 5 brought back from the near side of the moon. What is the consideration behind the weight choice of the lunar soil?
Well, actually speaking, the design, the capability of the Long March, the Chang'e 5 mission is 2 kilograms of lunar soils. But you know that we only have a certain container, and in the volume of the container is limited. So although we have the ability to bring back 2 kilograms of lunar soil, but actually speaking, last time it's a little bit lighter than that. So it's actually speaking, it's 1.731 kilograms of sample. But that's also normal, because you know that it can vary from maybe 1.5 kilograms to 2.5 kilograms. That's all normal, very normal. But this time we hope we can have the samples more than 2 kilograms. So maybe the container is bigger now. And this is one thing. Another thing is that, you know, that we choose, why you asked it is so complex, because we choose the mission profile to have a lunar orbit rendezvous. So this is why it is so complex. It is because of this.
Right, Professor, we're now entering the countdown phase. It's about 39 minutes, a little more than 39 minutes to the launch.
So you can see the launch pad. This is the biggest launch complex in Wenchang spacecraft launch site. And we've already seen that all the rotational platforms of the service tower has already opened.
Right.
We can see the whole rocket now. And you can see that, you may notice that in 2 points of the space of the rocket, we can see the white forks. So the white forks is because, you know, that for the Long March 5 rocket, we choose what we call a cryogenic propulsion system, which means that we use the propellant with very, very low temperature. Actually speaking, for the core stage, either the first stage and the second stage of its core, we use liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen as a propellant. And for the 4 side boosters, we use kerosene and liquid oxygen. So you can see all these propellants are stored in a very extremely low temperature. So you know that it will be, to keep its low temperature, we must allow it to be released, the vaporized gas to be released from the fuel tanks. So, you know, it's very, very cold, and when it met the air, the water vapor inside the air will be frozen, and you can see the white fork. So that's the reason why you can see this white fork just during the launch process. But it will be very interesting. You know that because the propellant stored in a very low temperature, so it will be evaporized constantly. So we must refuel the propellants very constantly.
Right.
So only maybe at about 30 minutes or 40 minutes before the launch, we can stop this process. And there will be a very interesting phenomenon. So at that moment, you will see that the white fogs are disappeared. So that is the moment we stop refueling to the fuel tanks.
And once the fueling or the refueling process is complete, the mission will become irreversible. So it's like all systems go, just waiting for that final big
honestly
moment.
speaking, at this moment, it's still reversible.
There are still uncertainties.
So you know that, yeah, exactly. So for any space launch, it is a business not only for the rocket and the service tower. It is a business of a huge system or a system of systems. You know that if anything wrong happened to any of the systems, we must stop to halt the whole process. For instance, we have the launch site system, the rocket system, the lunar probe system.
The astronaut system.
This time, no astronaut,
No
but
astronaut
we have the, the TT and C system. So, you know that we have all kinds of, not only the ground stations, but we also have the attendance of the data relay satellite. So if anything wrong happened to this system, we also need to stop the whole process. And you see, to increase the reliability and make it more easy to be successful. So as Sun Ye already mentioned, for this mission, we choose what we call a narrow window launch, which
That's
means...
right, that's a special technology, narrow window, in a span of 50 minutes and over 2 days. What's the consideration behind
so
this?
that means that, you know, that just before that, we've already mastered technology of zero window launch, which means that the moment of the launch can be accurate better than 1 second. So that's a zero launch window, so strict. But you know that, as we already discussed, there are a lot of uncertainties. In some cases, we need to delay, postpone the launch. But you know that with the zero launch window, you may lose the chance for the launch today. For instance, if something wrong happened to a very small subsystem, maybe you can handle that within 1 minute. But if you choose a zero launch window, you will lose the chance to launch today. But today, we can have the narrow launch window, which means that although strict, still the launch window is very strict, but it is not 1 second, it is several minutes. Right. So if anything wrong happened to a certain system, we still have the chance to reorganize the launch today, which means that after we solve the problem, if still in the launch window, we can still conduct the launch.
Well, Professor, since we talk about one feature of the Chang'e 6 mission is to retrieve sample from the far side of the moon, let's take a look at this report. We are going to see the probe is also going to look just like its predecessor, the Chang'e 5 probe. Our Sun Ye has the story about the retrieval of lunar soil.
If you know Chang'e 5 probe, the probe for China's first lunar sample return mission that started in 2020, then you will find the Chang'e 6 probe very familiar. But the Chang'e 6 probe is now facing a whole different terrain. To sample retrieve for the first time from the lesser-known far side of the moon, it needs a relay satellite for communication. It needs to be even more efficient and time-sensitive. It's also coping with more rugged moon service. That's on top of all the suspense lunar exploration missions already have. But researchers and developers behind the Chang'e 6 probe say it has everything that is required of because it's standing on the shoulders of giants.
整个月面是更崎岖的。
For example, the far side of the moon is more rugged, but we can choose a relatively better place to land. This is a process from rough to more defined, in which we first rely on images coming from the ground and satellites to select a general area. Then there are sensors that would help specify the landing place and ensure that it lands right.
Chang'e 6 also has multiple international science payloads with it.
The interface of international payloads and the probe are all standardized. The power circuit has been designed for safety. The international payload team and us have together conducted deep and detailed testing work on the payload's connection and more to ensure that they can complete their tasks.
The mission is viewed as a golden opportunity for science research. Until now, no probe had ever touched down on the far side of the moon until China's Chang'e 4 mission in 2019. Sun Ye, CGTN, Wenchang, Hainan Province.
Well, the far side of the moon is still considered by many as an area that has no direct sunlight and has no line of sight
you
from
have
the
sunlight.
Earth. No direct sunlight at some point. The Aitken
Yes,
Basin, for
yes.
example, right? So let's talk about this. If we rewind the clock backwards a little bit, the Chang'e 4 mission made a successful soft landing on the far side of the moon, and the Chang'e 5 was bringing back samples from the near side of the moon. Were both missions paving the way for the Chang'e 6?
Exactly. So you can see, as we already mentioned, the Chang'e 4 mission, the probe almost have the same configuration compared with the Chang'e 6. So we already get the experience, very, very important experience for the Chang'e 6 mission. And also, as you mentioned, the soft landing. Until today, the Chang'e 4 and its Yu-2 or the Jade Rabbit 2 rover are still the only two spacecraft working on the far side of the moon. So today, we conducted another mission. Also, if it can be successful, this will be the first time we get the samples from far side of the moon. You know that this have so much difficulties and challenges. First, you know that you may see my post on WeChat, the photo of the moon. But for me, because I stand on the Earth, so I can only take photos of the near side of the moon. And for the far side of the moon, you can never have that on the Earth. So also the same situation for the ground stations on the Earth. So you can see that on far side of the moon, we don't have any support from the ground stations from here because we cannot see that. So the only choice for us to utilize the data relay satellite, either use the Qiqiao Magpie Bridge or the Magpie Bridge 2 data relay satellite. So this is one difficulty. Another one comes from the terrain. You see that the most relative flat regions of the moon is located in the near side of the moon.
Right.
So we call that the lunar mare. For instance, the Sea of Tranquility, the Sea of Imbrim, the Sea of the Ocean of Storms. All these lunar mares located in the near side of the moon. For the far side of the moon, you can sell them.
It's a totally different story.
Totally different terrain, totally different shape.
Unknown territory.
Yeah, some terrain are very, very steep. So it's more risky.
Professor Yang, it's a 30 minutes countdown to the launch mission.
So it is T-minus 30 minutes and counting. Or during this process, already many critical checkings and many steps were conducted. For instance, there are all kinds of subsystems on board our Long March 5 spacecraft. But you know that during the countdown, we will have the checking, examination, confirmation of all subsystems. And so, you can notice already on the big screen in the commander's room, we've already seen the right moment for the ignition.
Yeah.
Well, you can see that during the countdown, we will have all kinds of critical checkings, and each one is critical for us. And also, you may notice that, okay, look, on the launch complex, although all the rotational platforms on the service tower has already been rotated out, you can see the whole launch vehicle. But still, you may notice there are some very small arms still connected to the launch vehicle.
Right.
So at this moment, we still have the cables, pipes, connected to the launch vehicle. You can still see the white fogs released from the tanks, the fuel tanks on the rocket. So at this moment, we can still use the pipes to pour the propellants into the tanks of the launch vehicle.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating to think how far humanity has come from the Apollo mission in terms of lunar exploration. It's been more than half a century. And then in recent years, or in the recent decade, we are seeing countries, major players of space missions, returning back to the moon, trying to understand more about this planet. What is the purpose of that? What is driving this passion to go back to the moon?
Well, you know that generally speaking, there are two phases in the lunar exploration of human being. The first phase comes from, since actually speaking, 1958. to the year 1976.
Yeah.
So on the first phase, there are only two players, the U.S. and the former Soviet Union. But this is the era of what we call the moon race or the space race. So this race, in this phase, all the activities are politics driven. So they don't care how much they spend on this program. They just want to get the first, every first. So, but it's not sustainable. When they get their purpose, it cannot be continued because so great investments found in this program.
Colossally expensive.
Exactly. So they were saying that each time you launch a Saturn V lunar rocket, you exhaust a aircraft carrier. So that is the reason why it's not sustainable. But since 1990s, last century, since this comes the second tide for the lunar exploration, during this phase, all these space capable nations send their probes to the moon. But this time, it's not politics driven. It's just
scientific driven.
Exactly. So just we want to get the scientific research rewards for all of us. So this time is more reasonable and sustainable. And moreover, you see that with the probes of many countries, we already have a very, very important discovery,
right.
The water on the lunar surface. So the water are stored in ice form, in solid form, in the permanent shadow areas, in the North
in
Pole,
all those craters,
South Pole,
craters,
South Pole, exactly.
Basin.
That's the orbit of the moon is very unique because that the equator of the moon is very close to its orbital planes, which means that the different seasons, the direction of the sun does not change much. So the direction of the sun is greatly influenced by the terrain of the lunar surface and also its latitude. So in the polar regions, it's possible to have the permanent shadow areas.
Well, Professor, let's now also hear from a colleague. The Chang'e 6 will also carry equipment from other countries.